Okay, we're going to take a look at the game Flying Colors, designed by Mike Nagel in 2005. And the game was so popular, it actually went into a second edition, and this is the 2010 edition, published by GMT. Very popular game and a very good game. Now, the reason I'm showing the Wooden Ships and Iron Men box there is because I'm an old Wooden Ships and Iron Men player from way back. I mean, Wooden Ships and Iron Men goes back to 1975, so we're talking about a very old game. And I can hardly believe that Flying Colors is now, around 11 years old now. Time has really flung by. Like I said, I'm an old Wooden Ships and Iron Men man, so I didn't come to Flying Colors till much later. I've had it for several years, but never really gave it the attention it deserves. And I don't really know how this video is going to go. I'm just going to show you some of the highlights about Flying Colors and why I like it and Wooden Ships and Iron Men for different reasons. Now, just to show you the difference in the size of the game, Wooden Ships and Iron Men compared to Flying Colors. There I've got the Wooden Ships and Iron board lying on top of the 3 Flying Colors boards. You can see that Flying Colors is a much, much larger game. It really fills my wargaming table there. So you've got 3 maps as opposed to almost 1 map. Now in Wooden Ships and Iron Men, you were able to play Trafalgar on an area like this, while, as you're going to see, on the Flying Colors game, you have a lot more room to maneuver. Now, both games featured nicely modeled ships that occupied 2 hexagons. And well, I'll zoom in later on, but the Flying Colors counters are far, far superior to the Wooden Ships and Iron Men counters. For those of you who saw my video on Wooden Ships and Iron Men, you'll know what I mean. But the counters to this game are absolutely beautiful, and we'll take a look at that very soon. Now, I've got set up here the Battle of the Chesapeake Capes scenario, and I'm going to talk a little bit about that specific scenario, because that's the one that a friend and I played recently. And we found some, I'm going to call anomalies in it, and some things I quite didn't like, and things I did. So this is just to show you the scale. It's quite a big game. It takes a lot of physical space. Now in this situation, Battle of the Chesapeake Capes, you've got the British under Graves here, bearing slowly down on the fleet of de Grasse. Now, this takes place during the siege of Yorktown. And what Graves has to do is really brush away the French fleet, get into Chesapeake Bay, and try to save Cornwallis's doomed army, which is under siege. A task which is almost impossible for this age. And this is where the game really shines. It really does show you the fleet level tactics of the period. Wooden Ships and Iron Men was much better for showing smaller ship actions, maybe 6 ships or less. It wasn't that good at doing big actions like Trafalgar and Glorious 1st of June, and even this scenario, Battle of the Chesapeake Capes, and I'll show you why. Now, with Wooden Ships and Iron Men, you had to fill out these log sheets for each individual ship. So if you're doing this one, let's say Chesapeake, with like 19 ships, well, here French had 24 ships, you'd need 6 of these sheets, and you'd have to fill out a log for each individual ship. And I set them up. This is actually what spurred me, believe it or not, to play Flying Colors. I did the ship logs for Wooden Ships and Iron Man, and it took me about an hour and a half to fill them out. And then I said, you know, there's got to be a better way. And that's when I began to look at Flying Colors as opposed to Wooden Ships and Iron Men. Now, Wooden Ships and Iron Men was imitated by many, many copycat games over the years. Close Action and other ones followed the Wooden Ships and Iron model to a great degree. They had log sheets, you had to fill out individual ships, and they may claim to be completely different games than Wooden Ships and Iron Men, but in reality they were just really clones or more advanced versions of that game. Mike Nagel, when he designed Flying Colors, used a different model entirely, and I'm very glad he did, because he designed it for fleet actions. Now, there is a log sheet in Flying Colors, and it's optional to use. You can play the game using the informational markers, but I prefer actually the log, because we found in playing the game with large actions, you get tons and tons of these informational counters which just clog the board and make everything a little bit kind of messy. So I'm actually used to using the log sheets. Now the log sheet time to fill this out for flying colors was maybe 3 or 4 minutes. I was able to do the British. The French was the same thing. So less than 10 minutes I had the log sheets more or less filled out and ready to go. So the setup time for flying colors I'm very impressed with. It's got some very good setups in the playbook for very many different fleet actions. And there's the playbook. And you, of course, you've got Trafalgar in there. You've got the glorious 1st of June, the Battle of the Nile, Cape St. Vincent. And I understand the Ship of the Line expansion kit gives you even more scenarios. So with flying colors, you get lots of scenarios, and it's easy to set up. But how does the game play? Well, I'll tell you a little bit about the game we played yesterday, Battle of the Chesapeake Capes, and I'll tell you why I like the game and some little nitpicks about it too. Okay, there's a close-up of the French counters, and I guess I should explain some of the numbers. One, you've got the name of the ship, of course, there. In this case, the Bourgogne, the Diadème, and the Réfléchi. The M number here represents the manpower or Marines on board. In the brackets here, you've got the actual rate of the vessel. In other words, this is a 74-gun ship of the line, that's a 74, that's a 64. That's the actual number of guns the ship carried. But up here in the upper left is the, we'll call it the rate for game purposes. So it's a fourth rate, you'd be on the fourth line of the chart, the third rate, third rate, third rate, so on. Also, there's codes within the counters themselves. A circled white number means the ship has more guns than usual. A circled black number means it has less guns than normal. And there's a typical admiral there, Bougainville. And of course you've got the French flag showing the nationality. Over on the right here is the, I'm going to call them the hull hits, but they technically aren't, but in effect they are. So, of course, the higher this number, the more damage the ship can take. So, for example, the Diadème here has 13. And when it takes 13 hull hits, you'd flip the ship over, and it would be able to take 12 more before being sunk or having to strike. And you can see the manpower correspondingly goes down over here on the other side. So that's how the mechanics of the counters worked. It was much more sophisticated than wooden ships and armed men. Now I'm going to show you just briefly the playing aid chart, the fire determination chart. Now I will make this very simple, but this is generally how the chart worked. Let's say you were third rate and you were firing at the target at range 4. You'd be on the 4 table, and then I won't even get into the modifiers, but there are plenty of modifiers. You'd generally be on the 4 table. Then you'd go over to the hit results table, over here 4, then you'd roll a 9-sider dice, and then there's more modifiers, and then you get a final result, which would result in manpower hits, rigging hits, or hull hits, and where there was a little wee asterisk, you'd have a chance of fire. Now that's a very simple description of what goes on, because you can see that there's a lot of modifiers here. -1 for a rate in black background if the base firepower is in the shaded area to show carronade range. +2 for point blank fire, cumulative carronade bonus, initial broadside, optional rule. All kinds of stuff. Now the tables were really nice and functional. They were black and white, but there was a whole host of them. A lot of tables in this game, and good charts too. Very good charts. And there was even tables on the back of the rules too. So you've got plenty of tables, all black and white, but very simple. I find a lot of games today have these fancy color tables, and they're very difficult to read. These are black and white, but they are very functional. Now, what I'm going to do is do something I don't usually do in videos. I'm going to generally describe how our game went yesterday, and then I'm going to let you know what I liked and what I disliked about the system, and why it spurred me on to do a Flying Colors light version. So let's see how our game went yesterday. Okay, this is the situation at start. Now we have Graves' fleet here, and de Grasse here. Now, the wind is coming from the northeast, so de Grasse is beating against the wind. You can see all the ships in one big long line, and the British, part of their fleet is reaching, and part of their fleet is beating against the wind. Now, the big thing in these fleet actions is trying to get your ships to bear, and we found it very, very difficult to get the rear ships to bring to bear, which is exactly what happens in real life. So in our game, we had the British close on de Grasse, and I'll just move a few counters and show you what the situation was like and what happened. Okay, after turn 1, the situation looked something like this. Not much change, actually. De Grasse's fleet just began moving forward, beating against the wind, and Graves' fleet began to close. The rear column began to turn their ships so they could be reaching and get 5 movement points instead of 2. So that was the situation after 1 turn. Not much happening there, and these ships being out of range. What happened on turn 2? Okay, now I'm going from memory here, so this isn't exactly what happened, but just generally what happened. The French slowed down a little bit because they wanted to make sure that they could engage these British ships. Of course, they didn't know that they were going to turn, but and the rear column continued to beat up against the wind. The British rear column merely closed. But the advance, the British decided to close quickly. They said, what the heck, let's make this into a game. We want to see how the game works. So what happened then was the range here is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Well, these 2 ships, the Pluton and the Marseillais, and they began to pummel long range the Shrewsbury. Now, yes, they threw away their initial broadside, but they wanted to start inflicting damage on the British as soon as they can, and they did. And I'll show you what happened at about turn 3. Okay, once again, I don't know if this isn't exactly what happened, but this is generally what happened. The British tried to turn to go down the French line. The head of the French slowed up a little bit, and they had some beautiful shots against the Shrewsbury here. So these 2 ships began pummeling good old Shrewsbury, and Shrewsbury did begin firing back. Pluton also had some raking fire here on the Intrepid as they turned around. So these were all kind of nice free shots for the French. And as we expected, the French began to cut up the rigging of the British ships on turn 3. And the British were not able to fire very effectively. Let's go ahead to about turn 4. Okay, by about turn 4, that was kind of the position. And from here on in, we're talking really hypothetical because I can't remember exactly what happened. But as you can now see, the French have still got a number of ships now that are going to be able to batter these 3 British ships. The British ships just don't have as many ships firing as the French. The British, in effect, are firing 3 vessels, while the French are, in effect, firing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 vessels. So the British have made some errors, no question. And it began to tell on the log sheets. And I'll show you some of them later on. Now, I can't remember what happened exactly on turn 5, except for one thing. When we got to turn 5, we had to do a wind change, number change. And the wind did change, which really messed things up. My opponent and I have atrociously bad luck for bad die rolls. And of course, the wind did change, and it went right straight in the French face. So it changed to the east, and the whole French line found itself in irons. Now, some of the British ships could scoot ahead here, but it wasn't that enviable for the British either, but certainly better than the French situation. So I'll try to generally show what happened and make some comments on the game in general, because we can't follow the simulation anymore. I can't remember exactly what happened. Okay, I'm going from memory here, and I know something is wrong because we had at least 1 melee, and I'll just put the ship adjacent because we did have 1 melee. And in that melee, a British ship was captured. Okay, this ship was captured, and the hits began to tell. The log sheets will bear evidence to the number of hits we were getting. The French were getting really battered. We made it to about turn 10 or 11. So it became a real melee battle after that. Lots of hits close range, with the French taking lots of hits and the British taking lots of hits. I think we worked it out to the what, the British had 50 or 60 hits or something. I don't remember. But anyway, after all that big melee, we had 3 ships strike on the French side and 1 ship strike on the British side. There was actually a 4th ship that struck on the French side, but it actually was recaptured by them. So remember that. We had 3 ships struck by the French and 1 by the British. But at this point we were using, or had to use, the break-off rules, because the British had the first ship to strike, therefore they had to roll on the break-off table every turn. And if they rolled a 0, they would lose the game instantly. Okay, so in our game, this kind of thing went on for at least 5 more turns. We made it up into turn 10, even though the British were rolling for break-off. They didn't get the break-off roll, which is 0. But around turn 11, they did get the break-off roll. And that ended the scenario, in theory, the French being the victors. But when we examined the logs, even my French opponent agreed with me, it kind of didn't make sense. You had 3 French ships taken, actually a 4th that was retaken, and only 1 British ship captured. So it didn't really make sense that the British would have broken off this battle. So I thought that rule needed a little tweaking, and I'll certainly do a house rule on that. Now, I didn't mention that we were not actually playing the original game as Mike designed it, because I had tried it before. We found it very, very, very long, very cumbersome. It was a very detailed game, and it just took a long time. I thought for a fleet level game, things should move faster. So what I did was, I freely adapted the tables and came up with my own, what I'm going to call Flying Colors Light rules. Now the original rules are about 24 pages long, many of them charts though and examples of play. But I was able to whip down the rules to about 13 pages, or about half, maybe let's say 10 pages technically. You got the index. And all I did was slick down the rules. Anything that slowed the game down, I took it out. I pretty well had to eviscerate the command system, because the command system, I didn't like it. It didn't work very well. It just was finicky. It kind of slowed the game down, so we took it out. We still have commanders, and they still affect the battle, but it's just easier to move the ships. And we used the original tables, but I just called them Flying Colors Light, and took out a lot of the modifiers, the ones that just almost never come up or just slow the game down. So Flying Colors Light plays in about half the time, because we played about 5 hours, did about 11 turns, and really got to see what this Battle of the Chesapeake was like. It was a very thoroughly enjoyable experience, and I really like Flying Colors, and I'm very glad that Mike designed it for us. Okay, well, what else did I change? Well, the other thing I changed, which I hated, and it did cause some problems when the game first came out, was that defensive and opportunity fire and interactive movement. I thought it just brought the game to a crashing halt. Yes, it was interactive. You moved one ship and another guy had defensive fire, and you had this interactivity back and forth. You know, you don't need it. When you're moving long lines of ship that long, the interactivity doesn't matter all that much. Now, Wooden Ships and Iron Men is the superior game because it's got the simultaneous movement. But that only works for ships, let's say 5 or less. You can do simultaneous movement with 5 ships, but you can't really do simultaneous movement with ships, with that many ships. It's just unworkable. And you know, it doesn't matter. Does it really matter if the British here move simultaneously with the French when they're like 15 hexes away? Of course it doesn't matter. It only matters when you get down to the nitty-gritty and the ships are very close. So in purchasing Flying Colors, I thought I was getting a very simple fleet level game, when actually it's a very detailed fleet level game. Perhaps too detailed for its own good, for the ship-to-ship stuff. But I just couldn't put away beautiful counters like this and ignore the game. It's just too good a game. So that's my final word pretty well on Flying Colors. I think it's a really great game. I think if you buy it and you're into the age of sale, you'll certainly be satisfied. But I wasn't satisfied enough with it. I had to just come up with something simpler. So I just slicked the rules down and I have a much more smoother playing game. And you can do the same thing, of course. Mike has designed the game open-ended, so anything you don't like, you just don't play with it. Just unplug it. You could still play the sequence of play the way Mike has designed it, but I prefer this smoother sequence of play. I'll just generally mention what it was. You rolled for initiative, and the person with initiative decided which side moved first. So let's say player 1 moves first, his ships do not fire. Then player number 2 moves his ships, they do not fire. Then they mutually fire simultaneously. Then you can grapple. So changing this sequence of play made the game a lot smoother. A lot smoother. My opponent, who had never played Flying Colors before, thought the game was excellent. But we were playing with what I'm calling Flying Colors Light, not the original game. So my final word on things, Flying Colors, yeah, the best fleet game out there. And if you like small ship actions, go with the Wooden Ships and Iron Men down there. I don't think I'll be breaking Wooden Ships and Iron Men out too much, except to play single ship actions. But Flying Colors, a very good game designed by Mike Nagel. Thank you for watching.